Hi guys, this is Mrs. Horman here. Just wanted to share this Van Gogh unit with you because he's my favorite artist, and so this is our last unit on Impressionism, and I'm just going to share some of my favorites with you so that you can see sort of the progression of his painting. So this is an early Van Gogh from 1887. I don't show you the earliest of his work. We're just going to jump in at 1887 when he is in Paris working on art full time. You watched the documentary last week on his early life and his life as a minister and stuff like that. I really like this piece, Self-Portrait with Gray Felt Hat. This piece is at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And the reason I show this to you is the video hinted at it. Van Gogh used himself as a model frequently because it was very expensive to get a model. And so through his self-portraits, we get to watch sort of the change in his style and things like that. This is one of his Paris self-portraits when he was using himself primarily as his subject. And we get to see the progression of his experiments as a painter. This one is often really pointed out as the beginnings of what people call neo-impressionism or post-impressionism, sort of the way his work moves away from what Monet and Renoir and Degas were doing and becomes sort of its own thing. What we do see here, though, with him is a really cool presentation of himself in, sort of like a nice suit and a gentlemanly hat. He's trying to show a side of himself as sort of a man about town. This is in Paris. This is probably the most experimental he gets with colors. As he moves into Arles and then to Auvers, the colors become bolder and bolder and more contrasting and stuff like that. But this, we have the complementary colors. We have the blue and the orange present in the background. We have the red and the green present in his face and in his beard. And we really do get to see sort of those long brush strokes to separate him and to separate him from the background and to show his jacket. It's a really beautiful piece, and I really like it. This is Madame Junot. It is also called L'Arlésienne. Excuse me. Which translates into the woman of Arles. And that was the town that he was living in at the time that he created this. What's interesting about Madame Junot is that she ran the cafe where Van Gogh spent many, many of his nights while he was in Arles. It was very near to the little yellow house that he lived in with Paul Gauguin. And it's here with Madame Junot in the cafe that she owns that he had many a late night drink and painted many local people. He actually painted her 6 separate times. He found her to be a very compelling subject. Her face he believed, was very expressive. And she was very knowledgeable about many things, and thus he shows her reading books. There are several versions of this. This one that I'm showing you here is at the Metropolitan the Metropolitan New York City. So you can see her there. There's one very similar to it at the Kröller-Müller Museum in Amsterdam. So what's interesting about her is he did 2 of her while he was in Arles. And then while he was there in Arles, he and Gauguin, sort of his friend and his rival at the same time, they both showed up at this cafe and decided that they would make a portrait of Madame Junot. Uh, Van Gogh and Gauguin decided they would work for an hour. At the end of the hour, Gauguin had a rough charcoal sketch of Madame Junot, and Van Gogh had this painting. So in an hour of working and depicting Madame Junot, Gauguin had a charcoal sketch and Van Gogh had a full oil painting. Um, so what he did though was he took one of Gauguin's to the asylum with him when he went to the asylum in Saint Remy, and he created 5 more uh, pictures of Madame Junot from that charcoal sketch. He used Gauguin's sketch as sort of a background, a preliminary sketch for paintings that he would later do of her while he was committed at the asylum. So speaking of Madame Junot, this is the Night Cafe in Place de Martin, and that's the address of it. This piece is located at the Yale University Art Gallery in New Haven, Connecticut. So what's really cool about this piece is you can see a lot of things happening here. So here's this cafe that Monsieur and Madame Junot owned. This is Monsieur Junot. Here we see this little curtain that leads back to a bright yellow wall and a chair, and it is often believed that, oh look, there's that bright yellow wall and the chair. This is their personal quarters in the back. And so what most believe is that, here is Madame Junot and here is Monsieur Junot, and with their personal quarters in the background. Why people really seem to be taken by this painting is a lot of people love Starry Night, but what they don't realize is that radiating light really starts here. Here you can see these lights hanging from the ceiling, and you can see that those swirling lines of light radiating off of it. And that really is the precursor, the thing that comes before Starry Night. You also have a lot of really cool things going on here. Super, super contrasting colors. I mean, look at the red wall and the green ceiling. The contrast there is wild. Look at the red wall and the orangey yellow of the lower wall. Look at the green of the pool table. So you see lots of contrasting colors. The paint goes on very thick in a technique called impasto, Impasto. And that just means that you can really see those brushstrokes. The paint is thick. It goes on thick. It stands up off the canvas. It's not an attempt to hide your brushstrokes. Those brushstrokes are very, very obvious, and the application of paint is very clear. And so you have that. You also have this odd perspective that will become very popular with Cubist painters like Picasso, like Cezanne. The room almost seems tilted. It looks like the room is tilted towards you. It's higher in the back than in the front. And we seem to be in an almost bird-like perspective. So, and that is not because he couldn't do perspective, but he chooses here to do a slightly altered perspective. This piece is also really important because we have lots of writings about it. He wrote to his brother about it, about the fact that he slept during the day and stayed up all night for 3 nights in a row to make sure that while he was painting this night scene, he was actually painting it at night. He painted several pieces of this cafe and gave a couple of them for the fact that he owed them money for all the alcohol that he had been drinking while he was staying there. He even writes to his brother Theo something about the line from the letter is something about he has taken so much of my money. My revenge will be to paint in his cafe or something like that. So that's the Night Cafe. And then we get into what is considered to be Van Gogh's most famous work. Probably, I would say probably even more famous than Starry Night, and that's simply because what people don't realize is there are so many of them. People are used to seeing this one. What they don't usually realize is Sunflowers is two separate series by Van Gogh. The first series happened in Paris in 1887. So these are his Paris sunflowers before his time in Arles. And you can see there, this one is at the Van Gogh Museum, this one is at the Met, this one is in Bern, and this one is at the Kroller-Müller in right outside of Amsterdam. So these are interesting because this series of sunflowers done in Paris, they're all lying flat on the ground, and they're for the most part just the center of the sunflower while you're preparing to take the seeds out of them. And so this is 1887. Then he goes to Arles and he paints sunflowers in a pot, but in two separate sets. In 1888, August of 1888, he paints this set. This one is in a private collection, and so you can't see that. This one was destroyed by fire in World War II, so you can't see that. This one is in Munich, and this one is the most famous one. This is the one that everybody knows, which is the one that's at the National Gallery in London. So this is the fourth version of sunflowers. This is the one, if you say sunflowers, that people usually talk about. And it's from the first section, which is why when I show it here, this is the one in London. Now this one is from the second set, his repetitions that he does then a few months later in January of 1889. And he does this one and then these two as well. This one is at the Van Gogh Museum. This one is in Tokyo. What's interesting about this one, I'm hoping you notice when I show it to you, is, my goodness, look at that. Look at this beautiful background. It's this blue, turquoise blue background with this bright reddish orange outline around the pot and the orangey red of the flowers. This one has a bright blue center and the blue of his name on the pot. And so this is from the first set. This is one in London. This is from the second set. This is the one at the Philadelphia Museum of Art in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Go see it if you ever have a chance. And the cool thing about these is this one, this set, and this set were both created for Gauguin. When Gauguin was going to come to stay in the little yellow house, he prepared a bunch of these to welcome Gauguin to the yellow house. And they differ in how many flowers are in the pots and what color the background is. But what he's trying to do is show sunflowers in all the stages of life. Some of them are in full bloom. Some of them have lost their petals and are down to, just the outside edge. Some of them still have some petals, but not all of them. And it's really this idea of, he's trying to use these bright yellows. And part of the reason for those bright yellows, and you saw this in one of the videos you watched, is a new ability to paint in this bright yellow as new pigment colors were invented, and not necessarily invented, but manufactured. They figured out a new way to make different shades of yellow in mass availability of paint. Yellow was Van Gogh's favorite color. He has said of it, yellow, what a wonderful color yellow is. It stands for the sun, and the sun is beautiful and happy, or something like that. And then he also once said something about the color yellow is capable of charming God. There's a belief that he specifically ate yellow paint, and that's not necessarily true. He did eat paint, but probably more than anything because he was suffering from mental illness. But there's no actual evidence that he ate yellow paint specifically. That's a myth. It's out there to make the story of Van Gogh sound cooler or something. Um, Moving on to the next one is wheat fields in the rain, or sometimes just called rain. This is 1889. This piece is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, so you could go see this really cool one and the sunflowers at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This was created in 1889 while he was in his uh, voluntary uh, stay at the asylum in Saint Remy. Um, he painted out of his window frequently, this particular view out of his window often, because you can see the wall and the fields and the hills in the distance. He painted it like Monet painted the church in uh, Rouen, and how uh, Degas painted his ballerinas. Van Gogh painted many, many times the scene from this window. Painted it at different times of day. He painted it in different weather conditions. This is by far my favorite because you see him experimenting with a different way of showing falling water, which is very difficult to paint. The ability to paint water falling from the sky as rain is very difficult. Snow, not so much, but water, very hard. And so here he captures, the rain going in slanted lines that are in a different angle than the wheat field, which appears to be in more, vertical lines. And so you get this contrast between the two, and the overall effect is sort of this beautiful blue, gray, purple, which is quite beautiful. And in a letter to Theo, his brother, he wrote about how he drew inspiration for this from Japanese prints that he had seen, and that looking at nature and trying to portray it in a bunch of different ways was something that he took inspiration from Japanese wood blocks. Um, so this one is very sweet and is very much different from pretty much every other piece he ever did. There is no other Van Gogh painting that is similar to this. The tree branch doesn't seem centered on any place. It appears to be floating in space, and it is very much it's very close to you, and it comes off the edge of the canvas, um, and it is a subject that he enjoyed painting. Now, this one was painted in 1890, in the beginning of 1890, January, I think. No, February of 1890. Um, but painting blossoming trees, painting fruit trees that have flowers, flowering fruit trees, was something that he did very often. When he first arrived in Arles, France, in March of 1888, the trees were all in bloom. And he spent months painting apricots and peaches and plum trees that were all flowering fruit trees. So this reflects his love of impressionism, the softness. This looks the most like a Renoir, Monet kind of painting than anything he painted. And it is because he uses that impressionism. He uses the Japanese woodblock techniques to create this oil on canvas. This is at the Van Gogh Museum. Almond blossoms um, are meant to represent awakening and hope and new life, because you've got this tree and it flowers, and after it flowers, the fruit is on it. So this is a very sweet story. On January 31st, 1890, Theo wrote to Vincent van Gogh to let him know that his wife, Joanna, Vincent's sister-in-law, had a child, a son, and they named the child Vincent Willem, as a celebration of, Theo's brother Vincent. And Vincent worked on this painting as a gift for Theo and his wife. He was very close to his brother. His brother was his best friend, and he created this to mark the occasion, symbolize the new life of the baby that had his name. What's really sweet is he wrote to his mother. Vincent wrote to his mother after he got the letter from Theo and Johanna. And he said, I was so glad when the news came, but I really would have preferred that they had named the child after Theo, as he is a person whom I love very much and who has looked after me in my life. But since they have named the child after me, I will make a picture for him. I have started it already. It is white blossoms on a sky blue background, and so he wrote to his mother and talked about making this piece for Theo and Joanna to mark the birth of his nephew. We know so much about Van Gogh because of his letters. He wrote to Theo all of the time, and the only time really that we're sort of at a lack for a lot of information about what he was painting is the 2 years that he lived in Paris. He didn't need to write to Theo because he was living with him. But pretty much every other part of his career, we have the letters that the men wrote back and forth to each other about Vincent's art. Now, Vincent didn't keep all of Teo's letters, but Teo kept every single one of Vincent's letters. So we have at least one full section and all of Vincent's letters because Teo kept them. So this piece is called Wheatfield with Crows. It was painted in July of 1890. Based on his letters, it seems like this was painted on July 10th of 1890. People love to buy the idea that this is Van Gogh's last painting because, oh, look how dark and tragic it is. But this piece is based on letters painted on July 10th, and Van Gogh doesn't die until July 31st. So he lives another, he lives another 3 weeks almost before he dies. And in those 3 weeks, he's painting at least one painting a day. So why does this have such a draw? Why do people think that this must be his last painting? Well, this painting does look sad. It looks isolating. It looks depressing. You have this road that seems to go nowhere. You have these birds that seem to be not flying in a same general direction. They seem to be scattered and uncertain. The colors, the sky is very blue, but it contrasts with the sort of brownish orange that is in the road here. And it looks very much more brown here, but in person it is very, very orange. This is at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And the green, contrasts with the reddish undertones of the path. So you have the green contrasting with the red. You have the blue contrasting with the orangey reddish tones in here. It feels sad and lonely. And he wrote that was what he wanted. In a letter, he wrote that its job was to express sadness and loneliness, but he also wrote that it helps to also show the what is fortifying and wonderful about the countryside. He loved being in Alvers. He painted in this field very often. There are 12 or 13 paintings done in this field. And the depressing part is this is part of the field where he does commit suicide. But while the sky is menacing and while it is very sad and while it is, all of those things, it is not his last painting. And it does, by saying that, it just sort of feeds into this, dark and tragic thing that was happening here. This is July 10th, somewhere around the middle of July, 15, 16, 17. He wrote a letter to Theo saying how good he was feeling. And he was feeling so much better. And so, we have to remember that Van Gogh was a master who fought mental illness his entire life. And so, don't fall into the hype. This is a sad painting, but not his last one. This could possibly be his last one. And again, because he died, we don't really have, he didn't go out, he didn't write and say, I'm going to go out and shoot myself. That was not how that went. But this painting shows us what abstract art will become. These are tree roots. That is what this is called. Look at the bright colors. Look at the contrasting colors, yellows and blues and reds and greens and all of that stuff. The lines are not completely realistic. It doesn't look natural. But it's also unfinished. And this is definitely one of the ones that he was working on when he ended his life. And Van Gogh's sister-in-law, Johanna, she had a brother, Andres, and he worked in a art sales, like Vincent worked at Goupil. Andres Bunger worked at a competing one, and he wrote. In a letter to Theo, it appears as though he had been painting this forest scene full of sun and life the morning before he died. It is left unfinished. And so I like to show you this one, not because I want to harp on the depressing part of, that it's unfinished and he died, but just look at how abstracted it is. You definitely see the move towards abstract art with this piece. So that is our little mini unit on Vincent van Gogh. And I will be putting up a fun and exciting worksheet to go with this. And I will be talking to you soon. Bye, guys.